I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
Hello.
Hi.
We have a pretty interesting episode set up for you guys.
We sure do. Today we are going to be exploring the wild world of Murderabilia.
Yeah, it is a subject that we've discussed here on the regular show and on Extra Credit. It's a pretty controversial subject. There's definitely no doubt about that. However, we kind of figured this is something that a lot of you are really curious about.
We want to clarify something before we go forward today. We're not here to discuss our own personal thoughts necessarily on the topic. The goal today is simply to explore it because we know many of you have a morbid fascination about it, or at least a hesitant curiosity.
I was telling Dina before we started that as I left the house to come here, I was asking Cody and Cody's brother, who lives with us. I was like, "What are your thoughts on the Murderbilia thing? Like, would you purchase something?" And Cody was kind of like, "What do you mean? Like Ted Bundy's underpants?" And then Shane had to chime in and said, "Ted Bunderpants, if you will." No, I would not buy Ted Bundy's underpanties or anything else for that matter. But they both agreed that they probably wouldn't purchase some Murderbilia.
I feel like that's never a good sign when your lady brings home some creepy stuff like that. I don't think it would go over very well for me if I did.
No, and while I personally wouldn't spend any money on something like this, Cody did kind of make it clear that he would not like anything of the sort in the house. So I was like, yeah, roger that.
Can't blame him.
But that being said, we really lucked out and we were able to score an interview with a Murderbilia expert and the owner of one such site. A bunch of you submitted some questions, and today we are here to share them, and we're going to be sharing them a little later in the episode.
Now, before we get too far into all of this, we very quickly want to answer one question. What exactly is Murderabilia?
So, the word Murderbilia refers to collectibles related to murders or other violent crimes and events. Oftentimes, these are items that were in one point either used or owned by people like the ones we often discuss on the show. This is often seen in clothing, art, weapons, and more.
One kind of item that collectors and even museums tend to look for are vehicles.
So today we're going to start with a vehicle that was very recently in the news, especially after the recent death of its former owner.
O.J. the Juice Simpson's 1993 white Ford Bronco. It boasts a leather interior and a V8 engine with less than 40,000 kilometers on the odometer.
But that is not why people are seemingly lining up to buy it.
For those of you who don't know, in 1994, the Bronco was seen on TV by over 90 million people while it was being chased by a plethora of police vehicles and helicopters. All while onlookers and fans of OJ stood by the road with signs such as "Save the Juice" and "We love the juice."
This was all, of course, after O.J. Simpson had been arrested for the murder of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ron Goldman. During the chase, the Bronco was being driven by O.J.'s friend, Al Cowlings, while O.J. himself was in the back seat, holding a gun to his head and threatening suicide.
After the famous chase, the Bronco, which was then valued at $1,800, was sold by Al Cowlings to a company by the name of Starifax for a whopping $75,000. However, the company intended to use it to reenact the chase for paying customers.
I don't know how I feel about that. That seems in pretty bad taste.
Just
but
wait.
I digress. They would take their patrons to Nicole Brown Simpson's grave. When OJ's former agent found out about this, he gave Al Cowlings the $75,000 himself to stop the sale.
I can't imagine, I'm not going to judge people, but I can't imagine being the kind of person that wants to go on that tour.
No, that seems, and we're the last people to judge anyone for thinking about morbid things,
Yes.
Obviously. But yes, it just seems in very, very poor taste.
The Bronco stayed in a garage until 2012. The vehicle was not driven, but was maintained regularly to ensure it stayed in tip-top shape.
It was purchased by the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas as part of their sports memorabilia exhibit. In 2017, it appeared on an episode of Pawn Stars and then landed in the Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Tennessee. This is the same place that houses Ted Bundy's 1968 VW Beetle.
They also have John Dillinger's 1933 Essex Terraplane, and most famously, Bonnie and Clyde's death car.
Latest reports say that it will be up for sale now that O.J. Simpson has passed away. The current owners are hoping to get a whopping $1.5 million for it. That is a long way from the original 1800.
It's quite a profit, isn't
No
it?
kidding. Holy cow.
Next up, we have something we've talked about quite a few times, murder houses.
Yes, we definitely talked about this in the past, especially with our Amityville series and most recently the Manson episodes.
We also saw the house where the Perrin family hauntings happen turn into a site where you can stay and hunt ghosts and even potentially see UFOs. And that's one of the wildest ones to me. That whole website, I swear, it still blows my mind to this day.
It's funny because I feel like people are going to ask, what's the difference between, say, taking joyrides in OJ's Bronco versus staying at the Perrin house where allegedly, like, the events of The Conjuring happened?
Mhm.
And I would argue that maybe this is going to be a hot take, but I would argue that one thing was very much a real murder that happened, i.e., OJ,
Mhm.
and the Perrin families is very much disputed as to whether or not the actions and everything really happened, just because of the supernatural element to it.
Yes, and we're going to get to some other houses. I'm actually very curious to know your thoughts on
Okay.
that. The home that Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were murdered in was sold in the 90s for $525,000 and once again in 2006 for $1.72 million.
Ooh. Speaking of OJ, the family of Ron Goldman was actually awarded upwards of $30 million after winning a wrongful death claim against him.
Not only that, when he wrote his book, If I Did It, the book rights were given to the Goldman family, which I feel like is pretty damn fair.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty audacious to write a book like that. I've always kind of thought that about the If I Did It. Again, seems like incredibly poor taste, and I feel like OJ's advisors should have been like, do we need to, if you need to write a book, do you need to call it that?
And the thing is, if you've never seen the cover of this book, it says I did it in really big letters, and
Yes,
the if is really, really
real
tiny.
small.
Yeah.
Real small. A common misconception is that a murder house or a location plagued by terrible events will sell for substantially less. However, in this economy, you don't stand a chance. You're probably paying much more.
A very famous home that has been on the market many times is the Borden House. Now called the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, it boasts a total of 6 different rooms to rent, ranging from $260 to $320 based on the dates that we looked at.
Interesting. They recently added 2 new basement rooms that you can rent called Under the Hatchet and The Washroom. They are as creepy as they sound. One of them even has blood-stained floorboards, and they claim it being one of the most haunted rooms in the entire house.
There are 2 of the more expensive rooms to stay in too, and the Under the Hatchet one is like literally like an unfinished basement with a really shabby looking bed in it. And I was like, I wouldn't sleep in there.
To be honest with you, I wouldn't sleep in an unfinished basement in a house in Edmonton. So,
Right, there you go.
I don't know. There's something creepy about the pink insulation peeking out from between the 2x4s, you know?
Oh yeah, especially for a house this old. It's just like you see the old creaky pipes. And I mean, again, the bloodstained floorboards. When you go to book a room, go to the website. I highly encourage it. They show the bloodstained floorboards, and it's just like it's right next to the bed. I don't think so.
Yeah, another infamous house that has been turned into a morbid bed and breakfast experience is, of course, the Basilica Axe Murder House.
This is a truly shocking unsolved case that we do plan on covering someday. The murders happened in June of 1912. 8 people, 6 of them young children, were bludgeoned to death as they slept.
Despite there being numerous suspects, 2 of which were taken to trial, the murders were never solved. The house is now owned by Lance Zoll. The website, murderhouse.com, states the following in their About Us section.
Welcome to the Villisca Axe Murder House. This historic home, the site of tragic multiple murders in 1912, 6 of whom were children, remains America's most gruesome and unsolved murder that struck down the young Moore family along with 2 children, the Stillingers, staying for a sleepover with the Moore children. The 1,200 square foot house contains 2 stories and a cellar and was originally constructed in 1900. Over the following 90 years, the Villisca Axe Murder House has had 7 additional owners. Due to the small home's tragic and violent history and frequent occurrences of unexplained events by visitors and residents, the home is recognized. In 1994, it was purchased by Darwin Lynn and his wife of 40 years, Martha, and opened the house to the public for tours, overnight stays, and ghost hunters in 1998, following years of restorations that removed plumbing and electricity to the house. The Moore home was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1998 and received the Preservation at its Best Award in the Small Public category from the Iowa Historic Preservation Alliance in 1997. Following Darwin's unfortunate passing in 2011, his wife Martha took over operations of the house for the next 12 years, actively involved in operating the house with longtime manager Johnny Hauser. In her 80s, Martha would pull weeds and engaged with customers. In 2023, at the age of 87, Martha decided to retire and entered into a contract to sell the house in October to Lance Saul, an entrepreneur and Marine Corps veteran who has a history of purchasing and preserving historic homes across America, many of which are operated by U.S. Ghost Ventures LLC that allow the public to take tours to learn about the stories and history of the homes, participate in special events, and stay overnight. The house officially changed ownership on January 5th, 2024.
If you do choose to visit, you can rent a room or the entire house for about $900 US for 2 nights. They have various ghost and cemetery tours, and yes, you too can even rent your very own Ouija board. They do not have internet, but you can visit the gift shop.
Would you stay at either of these houses, Charlotte?
That's a tough one.
Okay, let's say you and we've been invited to have a little girly sleepover at a murder house. Do you take it? All expenses paid.
I think so. I'm a big fan of back in the day, the BuzzFeed Unsolved. I used to love it when they would go to like the haunted jails and prisons and stuff. The thing is, I'm always of 2 minds. There's the part of me that's like very logical, being like, no, we can stay the night. Nothing's going to happen because ghosts aren't real. Then there's the other side of me that's like, bitch, don't you tempt fate? I would like to go because it's a very historical thing.
Yes.
I'd be curious to stay the night, I think. But I think I'd be kind of scared to do it. I'm not going to lie.
I feel like in theory, I say yes. Realistically, I am a chicken shit. I would be very frightened. Like, I would be fine until it was dark. And then I would be like, nope, 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 nope.
My ego says, absolutely, you can stay the night wherever you want, Charlotte, because things aren't real. But yeah, again, that little voice in my head is like, don't tempt fate. You don't want to be the girl that figures out it's all for realsies.
It just sounds like a white girl horror movie to me.
It does. And we do not want to be victims of that.
No, we do not. Next up, we have an interview with Nico, who owns the site www.serialpleasures.com, based out of France. His site boasts unique collectibles, including art, books, Murderabilia, and adult toys.
A few weeks ago, we did have listeners send us some questions for Nico to answer, and we're going to be reading out the questions today, and we'll be answering with what Nico enlightened us with.
So I will read the questions, and Charlotte will read the answers.
Sure.
How does that sound?
That sounds good to me.
All right, and again, these are questions that you guys submitted to us, so thank you so much. I added my own bonus one at the end because I had a little bit of a curiosity, but first question that we got was, what got you into this?
I myself was on the other side in the 90s for a crime that got international attention, and people would write and ask me for drawings, etc. At the time, I was also writing with about 30 serial killers, and I ended up having a pile of letters that I sometimes traded or sold to build a big collection.
The second question that we got was, how do you come across these items?
Most came from my correspondence with other inmates, but I have also explored the abandoned house of a German cannibal in 2020 and brought back many items that are unique, like his stove, freezer, and plates that he used for cannibal meals, and those sell pretty well. The house has since been destroyed by fire.
I can't even imagine exploring a house like that. That to me, again, I'm not even going to stay at a haunted house. I can't imagine exploring a house because, again, he mentioned it was abandoned, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute here. But that just seems horrifying.
I'm just genuinely surprised that it was something that a person even had access to and still had, a lot of times we see with murder houses, if you will, that they get demolished and rebuilt, or they
Mhm.
just get completely flattened and that's it. So to be able to just walk in and still see plates and utensils and appliances is kind of shocking to me.
It really is. Third question that we had submitted to us, which is a very valid one. What was the driving force behind the decision to enter into selling these items?
I had this big collection of things that were in drawers and files, and people were contacting me to ask if I was selling anything. So I understood that it was possible to actually earn a living doing this. Then later, I was approached by a company that bought many of those items and is now traveling throughout Europe to show them in a serial killer exhibition.
Fourth question was, what makes some memorabilia okay to sell versus not? Where is the line drawn?
The only line is the one drawn by the legislation of your country and the rules of the platform you use to sell them. eBay does not allow these objects, for example. Most murderabilia is about old cases dating from 20 or even 50 years ago. There's fewer and fewer serial killers, and people are more interested in buying stuff associated with big names from several decades ago. I really like that question because I was also curious about it
Yeah,
myself. I suppose in a very logical way, it's like, well, it's there's something that I can sell, and if there's a market for it, then kind of why not? I guess is kind of the line.
and like he said, he already had these items. And I will say, when doing the research for this episode, I reached out to every single website that I could find.
Mm-hmm.
Nico was the only one who responded. So I truly do. I
Interesting.
know this is controversial, but I truly do appreciate him taking the time to answer these questions
Yes.
because, again, it's not ones that we would normally get the answers to on our own. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
interesting to get the perspective of someone who's on this side of the fence, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely.
Question number 5 that you guys submitted was, what has been your most expensive item?
The freezer of Armin Muse, the German cannibal, for 40,000 euros. I also helped the exhibition purchase a pair of glasses owned by Dahmer in his early 20s, but I cannot give the price of that item.
I can imagine that would be a lot.
I would imagine that was a very pretty penny.
There were a lot of Jeffrey Dahmer items that I found while looking into this, including his Bible and a lot of
Mm.
letters and pictures and things like that from him. So the idea that someone was able to purchase his glasses is very interesting because, again, he was murdered while in jail.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to know if those were the glasses that he wore and also how those went from the jail where he was murdered to someone's collection.
No kidding.
This is one of the questions that I personally submitted because he sent us the interview here, and I was very curious about this because I'm sure a lot of you are thinking it too. So, speaking of Armin Muse, how are you able to get so many of his items from him? On the site, you have everything from plates that he used to his actual murder tools.
I knew the house was there to explore since Muse's arrest in the early 2000s, but I did not have the occasion to get there until 2020. The house was completely covered with graffiti, and it was a place where the local kids would come and have parties and destroy things. So I knew I had to save these objects from destruction and that their place belonged to a museum. I am so glad I did this. I basically saved these objects from fire. I took great risks moving these objects out of the mansion because the stairs were crumbling and the danger was very real. Of course, some people were very envious, and urbexers called the police, which is quite ironic since they claim to be anti cop and all. Urbexers being urban explorers, I'm assuming, right? An investigation was opened, but since the house was abandoned for so many years and the front door was missing, the robbery charges were dropped. It was also the police's responsibility that they had brought back items such as the freezer that was used as evidence instead of destroying them after the trial. Wow. So the items were actually removed from the home for evidence during the
Yeah,
trial, and then after they're like, well, we don't need them anymore, and they put them back.
I thought that was fascinating.
To me, I would imagine that the police would just destroy the items after, or that they would be kept in evidence for like perpetuity kind of
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
That's really interesting. So, all in all, I was at the right time at the right place, and I seized the opportunity to make some great money out of it. Many would consider this to be the best Murderbilia story ever, so I'm actually very proud of that whole experience. In a way, it was also kind of funny that I was the only one who actually saved the cannibal freezer from the flames, and that makes the story even more legendary.
Question number 6 that you guys sent in was any moral struggles to selling such stuff? Is there anything that they have refused to have anything to do with?
No moral struggles. I'm not selling stuff that belonged to victims. They belong to the criminals. I am not the one who is responsible for them being so popular. Blame it on Netflix and all the podcasts that make them so popular now, even 50 years after the crimes. Actually, that's what I was going to say. I would imagine that, say, like we kind of had a big uptick in like Ted Bundy content, like movies and documentaries, right? I would imagine that items related to him would go up in value during that time because of supply and demand. Same thing with Dahmer, right? We had the Netflix dramatization.
Yep.
I'm sure as interest increased, so did the value of certain items.
And these are items where you can't mass produce this stuff. I mean,
no.
I think of John Wayne Gacy, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, and all the art that he made, but there's only one pair of Jeffrey Dahmer's glasses out there.
Yes, absolutely. They are a particularly unique item at the very least. Nico goes on to say, people who have moral struggles about this should stop being a part of the problem and just stop being a consumer of anything true crime related on the internet. Because whether they like it or not, they are the reason why this market is so thriving. In a few years or even a few months, a TikTok trend will make Murderabilia go viral and it will be socially accepted. Is it morally vile or just a matter of social stigma? Societies build their own morals and they constantly evolve. Being a true crime freak was socially inadequate 10 years ago. Now it's a trend like any other. Murderbilia will be the next logical step forward.
I think that's really interesting.
It is true. I mean, like he says, we've evolved as society. Things that weren't acceptable before have become acceptable, and also I would say vice versa, right? I do think it's kind of one of those things where, like he says, if you are a consumer of true crime, then does that not tie into the kind of hype around such things as well? I can see where they're coming from.
I absolutely can too. And again, that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad he was willing to answer our questions, because when he said that, I was kind of just like, he's not wrong.
There's a part of me that if I came across an item for free, let's say, there's a part of me that would say, like, yeah, I am going to sell it on because fuck the person that owned it in the first place. They weren't a nice person to begin with, so really, what does it matter what happens to their items? At the same time, I will say, I don't believe that the original owner, shall we say, should get any kickback from any of that if they are still alive.
I do agree with that, 100%.
I don't believe they should be able to make any money off that.
I think this is one of the most controversial episodes we've ever done. We're not really big on controversy, but this is a topic that I do hope spurs a discussion within our listeners, because it is something that, you know, a lot of people would disagree with, but there's definitely clearly a market out there for it.
Yeah, it's a very polarizing topic.
One last question here before we get to my bonus question. Has any item ever given you such a bad feeling that you had to get rid of it faster than you expected?
No, and I tend to keep for myself the items that have specially bad energy attached to them. Interesting.
I wouldn't go that route personally.
No. I feel like if anything was giving me bad vibes, honestly, if a pair of socks I own is giving me bad vibes, I get rid of that shit. So
I don't mess with bad vibes anymore. I'm just like, you know what? If something is not good, I'm done.
I suppose at the end of the day, it's all up to your belief in it. I think belief gives things power. And if you don't believe in that sort of thing, then it's just an item in your house,
it's
right?
True. So I have a bonus question because, again, like I mentioned at the start here, he does sell adult toys.
Yes, and I have seen them. They're interesting to say the least.
Yes, there are some. Charlotte and I, at the end of last week when we were recording, we looked at them, and they're interesting. Again, it's serialpleasures.com if you want to check them out. So my bonus question to Nico was, I notice you sell some very unique adult toys. Do those sell often? I am genuinely curious.
The Bundy, I don't even know how to pronounce this. The Bundildo? The Bundy dildo?
Bundled?
Bundldo.
It's what it sounds like.
It is what it sounds like. The Bundldo sold quite well. Most clients were sex workers or professional dominatrix, but also collectors who want to own a unique conversation starter in their collection.
That's one hell of a conversation starter. Can you imagine that in a curio cabinet? It's a femur, by the way.
It is a femur. Yeah, I mean, you can check it out for yourself. He also has a clown butt plug,
and that's Pogo the clown.
Yeah, that's a John Wayne Gacy reference.
Yep.
Again, can't say that it's my particular cup of tea, but I'm not here to yuck anyone's yum.
That's true. We want to thank Nico for taking the time to answer our questions. Like we said at the beginning of the episode, we're well aware this is a very sensitive subject that many of our listeners might not agree with. However, his perspective is one that we normally wouldn't get.
No, it's very interesting to hear the different perspective on this. Something that many of you may be wondering about is the legality of all of this.
In the 1970s, New York State passed a law after Son of Sam killer David Berkowitz was rumored to have been profiting off of his own story. This law declared that profits are meant to go to the victims and not the perpetrators. And not so fun fact for you all, when I was looking into this, I found out he has a parole hearing scheduled this month.
He's still alive?
He's still alive. He's so old.
Dang, I thought Mr. Berkey Burke was dead in the ground.
No, he is just very fucking old.
Dang, well, he's lived a long time in jail. I mean, if you can call it living. Unfortunately, there are a lot of loopholes in this legislation, and oftentimes those who have committed heinous crimes still find a way to profit from them.
John Wayne Gacy caused a lot of controversy after his execution. His paintings sold for upwards of $175,000 each to collectors. Many of them belonged to his stepdaughter, who made quite a bit of money off of all of this.
In 2011, an exhibit in Las Vegas showcased his paintings, claiming that the National Center of Victims of Crime would get the proceeds from the show, but they responded to this by saying,
"We believe the idea of benefiting from an activity relating to such egregious and violent crimes would be in poor taste to the extreme. Out of respect for the victims' families, we have not agreed and would not agree to accept any contribution that comes from the sale of John Wayne Gacy's work, which he did while in prison for torturing and murdering young boys and men."
In 2011 as well, the U.S. government auctioned off items that belonged to Ted Kaczynski, with profits going to the victims of his crimes.
As it stands, 45 states in total adhere to the Son of Sam law. As for Canada, the provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Nova Scotia all have similar laws.
British Columbia took a little longer to join them, but did so after serial killer Robert Pickton penned a book that could have easily made him a big chunk of change. Paul Bernardo also attempted to pen various fictional books, many of them being about the Russian mafia and Al-Qaeda.
Fucking Paul Bernardo,
man. Stay in your fucking lane.
He also tried to release a rap album while he was in jail, so that's what Paul's all about.
Jesus. You know what? I'm all for embracing cringe. The cringe makes you strong, but that shit is cringy.
Listen to his rap. It's out there. Like, it'll make you want to just like poke your ear holes out with an ice pick repeatedly.
I mean, we all know that guy from school who is still in the same town you grew up in, still trying to release his rap album.
Yeah.
But imagine now that it's Paul Bernardo.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely not.
There are those out there who believe that these laws are unconstitutional and violate freedom of expression.
Now that we have social media, we see people profiting off of their crimes in different ways. I mean, we can look at Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who is on parole for being involved with the murder of her mother.
You can't tell me she hasn't made a small fortune from all of her social media involvement along with her documentaries. And the loophole here, for those of you wondering, is she is technically able to profit off of this because she's profiting not off of her crimes per se, but of her own life story. And that's where it gets really muddled when we say there's loopholes in these laws. They are less than ideal and they're less than easy to understand, and girls found a way to do it.
Well, and I think as much as a lot of these cases we see a pattern with, they're all very unique in their own way.
Yeah.
And so, how do you make laws specific enough when each crime is so different?
It's true. It absolutely is.
Wow.
So we kind of talked about it.
Yeah.
Would you or wouldn't you?
No, again, I was talking with Cody about it before we left the house, and we kind of came to the agreement that the only way we might partake in something like this is if we came across an item free of charge.
Yeah.
And then we either donate it to a museum or like a public collection where it wouldn't be profited off of, or if we received it for free and then sold it on for the profit ourselves.
Right.
But I'm not really interested in keeping something like that in my house. There's people out there that collect, say, Nazi memorabilia and stuff like that. And again, I think you can kind of come at it from one of two ways. One, you are a genuine historian that is just very much interested in the history, and these pieces are a part of history. And then there's the other side where it's like, oh, you maybe buy into the whole ideal, and I can't get behind that shit, right?
And it's interesting that you say that because Steve and I, we collect coins.
Yes.
That's one of our things. And we have in our possession, I believe now we're up to 5 different Nazi coins.
Okay, yeah.
Which I completely randomly stumbled across. I did not go looking for these.
Do they have the eagle and everything?
They do. Yeah, they do. And this isn't something that I ever would go out of my way to buy, but having them in my collection, it's kind of just like, it's just an interesting part of history to have. It's not something I agree with. It's not something I support, obviously. But the fact that they exist and the fact that I just happened to strangely come across them.
Well, I don't think it's that out of the blue. My dad also, he has I think it's an old coffee tin, and it's full of coins from all different countries, right? Like, my mom spent quite a bit of time in Hong Kong when she was in the army, so there's a bunch of Hong Kong dollars in there and stuff. But a handful of them are from when my dad's dad, my grandpa, was posted in Germany during World War II. And they're proper Deutschmarks and everything,
Oh my God.
right? So those are genuinely things that he came across while he was there during the time. And it's a little piece of history.
But I have to say, as someone who does collect foreign coins, I like them to be kind of 1960s and older. That tin sounds fucking amazing.
I think it's jealous. Super cool. And just the fact that for coins especially, you might come across something from a country that doesn't really exist anymore in the way that we think, obviously like borders change. We've talked about it before, even say with like, Yugoslavia and all that stuff, right? Things change so much. Countries became different things. Even if you think of, say, the Soviet Union, and then when all that broke up, everyone had to sort of reconfigure how their governments were set up, right? So owning a piece of history in the sense that, like you said, it's something you'll never come across again, brand new.
Yeah, we have 2 coin sets actually. One is, they're both 2 uncirculated sets that I just came across. One is the very last set of coins made by the USSR. Whoa. And the very first set of coins made by what is now Russia, which is really cool to have, right?
Yes.
So like, and for me, I collect, my biggest thing that I collect among a few things is Titanic memorabilia. And I was very lucky enough to become close friends with the leading Titanic expert in Canada.
Super cool.
And he has like the baby shoes of different survivors and different victims, and champagne flutes from people who were on the ship and things like that, coins and whatnot. And there, I mean, again, you're looking at something where thousands of people perished. So again, in a way, a very morbid thing. So I'd love to know for people, where is that line for you, if there is one? Because these are victims in a way. They're not victims of a murder per se, but they are people who died very tragically.
I wonder where the line is between an artifact from a tragic or violent crime and something that is just a historical piece. How much time has to pass for it to go from one to the other, right? Like you say, is it 20 years? Because 20 years, it sounds like a long time, but it's really not in the grand scheme of things. Or is it, oh no, it has to be 100 years, it has to be 50 years. Where do you draw that line?
When you think about that, we talked about where Robert Picton's Piggy Palace, how it's these brand new condos now, and Albert Fish, who maybe we might be covering in the future, the house where he committed one of his most heinous murders is now in edible arrangements.
Oh no, I don't like that
Right?
at all.
Like time. The thing is, whether we want to or not, time goes on, and these things are ingrained in history. But we have to build upon that. And again, for a house like that to now be a place where you go get your little fruit bouquet that blows my mind.
Yeah, that seems odd, but life moves on.
It does.
Oh man, it's a very interesting topic. We've asked your thoughts before, and thank you so much for sending in your questions. But now, having heard this and heard the response from Nico and his perspective, let us know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, email us at thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com. Comment on social media. We will be making a few posts about this. We're going to be sharing. He gave me permission to share photos from the site of some of the items that he does have. So we'll be posting those along with a little bit of their story. But I am very curious because, again, it's a controversial topic, and you can be obviously very interested in true crime, but want nothing to do with something like this, which I don't blame people for that. But we'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, now we're at the end of the episode where it is always time to give a shout out to our wonderful and splendiferous patrons over on Patreon. Dina, take it away.
A very, very huge thank you to Steven Centauri, Mayhem Mudkip, Lisa, Kevinus Musicus, Judy, Hillary, Brian, Bob, and of course, Atlantean Jedi. Thank you all so much. You guys are amazing. And make sure you check out the Patreon. We're posting lots of stuff on there. Of course, we have videos of all of our episodes from episode 100 and on, including extra credits, so you get to see our faces.
Yeah, and we're tweaking the video setup a little bit every time. We're kind of learning as we go along, just like everything else.
Yep.
We are doing some research into what we need to do to improve the setup, and we're going to keep working on that. So, yeah.
Latest addition to the studio for those who are watching is Guillermo down here. So if you want to see him and you want to know who Guillermo is, along with Eddie and Joseph, check it out, patreon.com/thegrimcurriculum.
Well, thank you all so much for listening today. This has been
The Grim Curriculum. All right, so my fact for you today kind of blew my mind because, again, time is an interesting thing. Cleopatra lived closer to our time than she did to the time of the creation of the pyramids.
Whoa. Actually, you know what? I have something to add on to that. When the pyramids were first being constructed, woolly mammoths still walked the earth.
Isn't that crazy? And I'm going to top it up with one more. We'll give you a 3-for-1 today. The span of what we now consider ancient Egypt was such a long period of time that at one point they had experts of ancient Egypt.
Whoa!
Right?
That's super cool. I love it.
All right.
Bye. Bye.